My name is Sarah. I'm 29 years old, and I thought I had finally built a life for myself in Portland, Oregon. That downtown apartment with exposed brick walls and city views represented years of grinding through 2 jobs while going to school part-time. I never imagined my parents would cross this line, sitting at their dinner table in suburban Beaverton, casually handing my younger sister Madison keys to my place without even asking me. When I finally stood up for myself after years of being the responsible daughter, everything exploded. Growing up in our 4-bedroom house in Beaverton, I always felt like I existed in Madison's shadow. Our house had plenty of space, but somehow the spotlight only ever found its way to one child. From kindergarten onward, the pattern was crystal clear. Madison received attention, praise, and resources while I was expected to figure things out independently. I still remember my 17th birthday. I had been dropping hints for weeks about wanting a small party with my debate team friends at this local pizza place downtown. When the day arrived, my parents had completely forgotten. Mom was busy driving Madison, then 13, to her gymnastics meet 2 hours away. Dad was working overtime at his accounting firm. I ended up ordering Domino's by myself and eating it alone in my room while scrolling through college application websites. Meanwhile, when Madison turned 17 4 years later, our parents rented the community center at our neighborhood park, hired a DJ who specialized in teen parties, and surprised her with a refurbished Honda Civic wrapped in a giant silver bow. The car even had custom seat covers in her favorite color, teal. School events followed this exact same pattern. My parents rarely attended my academic award ceremonies or speech competitions. When I graduated as valedictorian, Mom spent most of the ceremony on her phone coordinating Madison's summer camp schedule instead of listening to my graduation speech about overcoming obstacles through persistence. For Madison, they rearranged entire vacation schedules around her swim meets and stayed up until 2 a.m. helping her build elaborate science fair projects. I watched Dad spend 3 weekends constructing Madison's volcano display while my own history presentation on the Oregon Trail got a distracted, looks good, honey glance. The disparity became even more obvious during college. I worked 2 jobs simultaneously, mornings at a campus coffee cart called Bean There, and evenings shelving books at Powell's downtown location. Every dollar went toward my education at Portland State University, where I studied business administration with a focus on marketing. My parents contributed what they generously called what we can manage, which totaled about $800 per semester, barely enough for textbooks, let alone tuition or housing. Madison attended University of Oregon with complete parental financial support. She graduated debt-free while I accumulated $47,000 in student loans despite working 35-plus hours per week throughout college. When Madison struggled with organic chemistry, Dad hired a private tutor at $60 per hour. When she wanted to study abroad in Italy, they covered her flights, housing, and spending money. When I expressed interest in a summer marketing internship in Seattle, I was told to make it work financially, if I really wanted the opportunity. After graduation, I landed an entry-level position at a digital marketing agency in Portland's Pearl District. The salary was modest, $38,000 annually, but I budgeted obsessively, living with 3 roommates in a cramped house in southeast Portland near the Hawthorne district. I packed peanut butter sandwiches for lunch every single day, skipped social events that cost money, and saved every spare dollar with laser focus. After 4 years of promotions and freelance social media work for local restaurants on weekends, I finally accumulated enough for a down payment on a small 1-bedroom condominium in the Pearl District. That 850 square foot space meant everything to me. Hardwood floors that gleamed in the afternoon sun, a compact but efficient kitchen with stainless steel appliances, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered glimpses of Mount Hood on clear days. Every piece of furniture represented careful research and saving. The charcoal gray sectional sofa took 8 months of overtime pay to afford. The dining table came from 4 different estate sales, carefully refinished in my cramped garage workspace over 3 weekends. The bedroom furniture was a mix of IKEA basics and Facebook Marketplace finds, painstakingly assembled and arranged to maximize the small space. Nothing was expensive or fancy, but everything was intentionally chosen and earned through my own effort. Just before this family drama started, I had gone through a devastating breakup with Marcus, my boyfriend of 3 years. We met at a professional networking event and had what seemed like a solid relationship. He was funny, driven, and seemed to understand my complicated family dynamics better than most people. Then one Tuesday evening over Thai takeout, he casually mentioned he had accepted a job transfer to Austin without discussing it with me first. When I expressed shock that he would make such a life-changing decision without including me, he seemed genuinely confused. "I thought you'd understand," he said, as if my entire life was just background noise to his career ambitions. The breakup left me questioning my judgment about people and feeling particularly vulnerable about trusting others with my emotional well-being. Despite the unequal treatment growing up, I maintained what looked like a normal relationship with my family. I called Mom every Tuesday evening without fail. I sent thoughtful birthday and Christmas gifts that I carefully selected and wrapped. I attended monthly Sunday dinners, driving 45 minutes each way through Portland traffic to sit at their dining room table where conversations inevitably centered around Madison's latest workplace drama or relationship updates. I smiled and nodded through detailed stories about Madison's fourth attempt at finding her career passion, or her newest boyfriend who was definitely different from the others. I helped clear dishes while Mom worried aloud about whether Madison was eating enough vegetables or getting sufficient sleep. I hugged everyone goodbye while mentally calculating how many weeks I could reasonably postpone the next visit. These dinners were elaborate performances where I had the role of supportive daughter and sister while keeping my genuine feelings carefully locked away. I learned early that expressing hurt or frustration only led to being labeled oversensitive or jealous of your sister. So I constructed emotional walls and learned to keep conversations surface level and pleasant. My real life, my friendships, my struggles with dating, my professional achievements, my therapy sessions remained completely separate from my family interactions. They knew nothing about my promotion to senior account manager, nothing about my weekend hiking adventures in the Columbia River Gorge, nothing about the anxiety I was working through in counseling. The apartment became my sanctuary from all this emotional complexity. It was proof that I could create something beautiful entirely through my own determination and hard work. Madison's pattern of instability became impossible to ignore as we entered our late 20s. While I built a steady career trajectory with consistent raises and increasing responsibilities, Madison bounced between jobs like she was playing career roulette. She worked as a yoga instructor for 4 months before quitting because the studio's scheduling system didn't align with her energy patterns. She lasted 2 months at a marketing startup before deciding the company culture was too corporate for her free spirit. She tried selling handmade jewelry at farmers markets, but abandoned the venture after 3 weekends when sales didn't meet her expectations. After each job ended, our parents stepped in with financial rescue packages. They covered her rent when she couldn't make payments. They paid her car insurance when she claimed work stress was affecting her ability to focus on mundane responsibilities. They even funded a 6-week meditation retreat in Costa Rica when she declared that regular employment was triggering her anxiety and she needed to realign her chakras. Meanwhile, I received praise for my independence and self-sufficiency, as if my ability to support myself was a convenient personality trait rather than a necessity born from years of benign neglect. Madison's relationships followed identical patterns of drama and instability. She cycled through boyfriends, roommates, and friend groups with exhausting regularity. Each relationship ended with explosive conflicts that somehow always cast Madison as the innocent victim of other people's toxic behavior. Friends would suddenly become energy vampires. Roommates would transform into impossible control freaks. Boyfriends would reveal themselves as emotionally unavailable or threatened by strong women. Each time, our parents offered unlimited emotional support, practical advice, and ultimately financial assistance to help Madison transition to a healthier situation. About 10 months ago, I started noticing concerning behavior from Madison regarding my apartment. The first incident occurred when I invited her over for dinner to celebrate her new job at a boutique wellness center. As I prepared salmon and roasted vegetables, she wandered around my space with unusual interest, opening closets and examining my storage solutions with what seemed like professional assessment. Her comments appeared innocent enough initially. This place is absolutely perfect for hosting parties, and you have so much storage space for someone living alone. I thought nothing of these observations until she began asking detailed questions about my monthly HOA fees, building security protocols, and whether my lease allowed overnight guests. 3 weeks later, she texted asking to borrow my black blazer for a job interview. When I returned from work that evening, I discovered not only the blazer missing, but also 2 pairs of shoes, a leather purse I'd saved for months to buy, and several pieces of jewelry, including my grandmother's pearl earrings. When confronted, Madison acted genuinely surprised by my frustration. "I thought you'd want to help me look professional," she said with wounded innocence. "It's not like you were planning to wear all of that today anyway." The unannounced visits began escalating shortly after. I would arrive home from work to find Madison sitting comfortably on my couch, having convinced the building's doorman to let her in by claiming she was my sister and I was expecting her. She would wave off my surprise with casual explanations like, "I was downtown running errands," or "I needed some sister bonding time." These surprise visits always concluded with requests for financial assistance, money for an emergency dental appointment, use of my laptop because hers was acting glitchy, or my credit card because she'd forgotten her wallet at home and needed groceries. The situation reached a breaking point when I returned from a weekend visiting friends in Seattle to discover that Madison had hosted what appeared to be a dinner party in my apartment. 6 strangers had used my dishes, left wine rings on my coffee table, and somehow managed to stain my cream-colored rug with what looked like red sauce. When I called her in absolute shock, she laughed dismissively. "My apartment is way too small for entertaining, and I knew you wouldn't mind." We tried to clean up most of it before leaving. I finally confronted Madison directly, sitting her down over coffee at a neutral cafe in Northwest Portland to establish clear, non-negotiable boundaries. "Madison, I need you to understand that my apartment is my private space," I said, trying to keep my voice calm but firm. "You cannot come over without calling first. You cannot borrow my belongings without explicit permission, and you absolutely cannot host gatherings there when I'm not home." Her response was immediate and dismissive. "Why are you being so uptight about everything? We're sisters. What's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine, right? You've always been weird about sharing stuff." When I maintained my position, Madison did what she always did. She called our parents for backup support. That evening brought a lengthy phone lecture from Dad about family members supporting each other through difficult times, and a tearful call from Mom asking why I was being so selfish when Madison just admires what you've accomplished. The validation I needed came from my friend Jessica, who witnessed one of Madison's unannounced visits firsthand. After my sister left, Jessica turned to me with obvious concern. "Sarah, that behavior was completely inappropriate. You realize that, right? The way she went through your mail like she lived here, the comments about how much your furniture must have cost, taking your sweater without asking, she's not respecting basic boundaries." The final violation occurred when I noticed items in my apartment being moved or disappearing entirely. My passport, which I always kept in my desk drawer, somehow migrated to my kitchen counter. Important financial documents were clearly shuffled through and rearranged. A pair of expensive wireless headphones vanished completely. The security of my own home began feeling compromised, and with it, my fundamental sense of safety and independence. Everything came to a head after I returned from a 4-day business conference in San Francisco. The meetings had gone exceptionally well. Our agency had landed a major client, and my boss had hinted at a possible promotion to creative director if the campaign performed well. I was riding a wave of professional satisfaction as I unlocked my apartment door, ready to celebrate with a glass of wine and my favorite Thai takeout. That euphoria evaporated instantly. My carefully organized space looked like it had been hit by a small tornado. Empty beer bottles covered my kitchen counters alongside containers of half-eaten Chinese food. My throw pillows were scattered across the floor, and an unfamiliar denim jacket hung over my dining chair. A strong smell of cigarettes lingered despite my building's strict no-smoking policy. As I moved through the apartment in growing horror, the violations multiplied. Multiple damp towels lay crumpled on my bathroom floor. My expensive skincare products had been opened and used, with caps left off and contents visibly diminished. The spare bedding I kept organized in my hall closet was scattered across the living room couch, along with blankets I didn't recognize. The most devastating discovery awaited in my bedroom. My journal, which I kept private in my nightstand drawer, lay open on my bed with pages clearly turned and dog-eared. Next to it sat a coffee mug with lipstick stains that matched the shade Madison typically wore. The violation of this most private space, the thoughts I'd written about my therapy sessions, my feelings about our family dynamics, my deepest insecurities, was breathtaking in its cruelty. I called Madison immediately, my hands trembling with rage I rarely allowed myself to feel. When she answered with a cheerful, "Hey sis," I could barely form coherent sentences. "My apartment. You were in my apartment with people. You read my journal." Her response was predictably casual. "Oh, that. Yeah, I needed to get away from my roommate situation. They've been super annoying lately, playing music too loud and leaving dirty dishes everywhere. I just needed somewhere peaceful to hang out for a few nights." "A few nights?" My voice rose to nearly a shout. "How long were you here? Who else was here?" "Just some friends from my yoga teacher training program, and only for like 4 nights, maybe 5. We cleaned up most everything." The blatant lie was infuriating. "You went through my personal belongings. You read my private journal. You had strangers sleeping in my home without my knowledge or permission." Her voice immediately shifted to the wounded, tearful tone she deployed whenever confronted with consequences. "Why are you yelling at me? I was going through a really rough time emotionally. My living situation is super toxic right now, and I just needed my big sister's support. I thought you'd want to help me." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from Mom. "Of course. Right on schedule." I declined the call, but seconds later, Madison said, "Mom wants us both at dinner tomorrow night. She says it's important." The emergency family dinner the following evening had all the elements of a carefully orchestrated intervention, except I was being intervened upon, rather than the person who had systematically violated boundaries. My parents' house in Beaverton looked exactly as it always had. Family photos dominated by Madison's achievements, furniture arranged to showcase Mom's collection of ceramic lighthouses, the lingering scent of Dad's pipe tobacco despite his promise to quit smoking 3 years ago. The tension was thick as we sat down to Mom's famous pot roast dinner. Dad cleared his throat multiple times, his telltale sign of preparing for what he considered a serious family discussion. Mom fluttered around refilling water glasses that nobody had touched and rearranging serving dishes that needed no adjustment. After 20 minutes of painfully silent eating, Dad put down his fork with deliberate ceremony. "Your sister has encountered some challenges recently," he began, as though Madison weren't sitting directly across from me, studying her plate with sudden fascination. "Her current living situation has become untenable." Mom jumped in quickly. "The roommates are completely unreasonable, playing loud music at all hours and bringing strangers over without warning." There was a warning, Madison mumbled into her mashed potatoes. 2 months' notice, actually. I remained silent, already anticipating where this conversation was heading. Dad continued with renewed authority. "The point is, your sister needs temporary assistance while she transitions to a more suitable housing arrangement. We've always emphasized that family supports family during difficult times." "Family supports family," Mom echoed automatically, reaching over to squeeze Madison's hand protectively. "We know you have that beautiful apartment with plenty of extra space," Dad added, his tone suggesting this was a perfectly reasonable request. "Madison was evicted," I stated flatly, cutting through their carefully constructed narrative. "That's what this is really about. She didn't pay rent again, and now she has nowhere to go." My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. Mom's mouth tightened into a thin, disapproving line. "It's not an eviction if someone chooses to leave voluntarily before the situation escalates unnecessarily." "We provided her with rent money," Dad added, confusion creeping into his voice for the first time. "Last month and the month before that." Madison suddenly became intensely interested in rearranging the green beans on her plate. "So what exactly are you asking me?" I said, though I already knew the answer perfectly well. "We think it would be most beneficial for Madison to stay with you temporarily," Mom said, her voice taking on the artificially sweet tone she used when trying to manipulate situations. "Just until she secures new housing, a few months at most." "Absolutely not." The firmness in my own voice surprised me. "Sarah," Dad said, his tone hardening instantly, "your sister needs assistance. This is what families do for each other." "No, this is what our family does for Madison," I replied, years of suppressed frustration finally spilling out. "When I needed help with college expenses, I worked 2 jobs. When I needed housing, I found roommates and worked overtime. When I wanted to buy an apartment, I saved for years while living in less than ideal conditions." "That's completely different," Mom interjected. "You've always been so independent and self-reliant." "And that became your excuse for giving me nothing while giving Madison everything," I said, the words I'd swallowed for years finally emerging. "I'm not allowing her to move into my home. Not for 1 day, not for 1 week, and certainly not for months." "You have extra space," Dad argued, his face beginning to redden. "Why a whole living room that barely gets used?" "I have 1 bedroom and a home office that I require for my job. And even if I had 10 bedrooms, the answer would still be no. Madison doesn't respect boundaries. She's proven that repeatedly over the past year." "Boundaries," Mom said dismissively, waving her hand as though swatting away an annoying insect. "Sisters should share and support each other naturally." "Support should go both directions," I said firmly. "When has Madison ever supported me? When has she shown genuine concern for my well-being or respected my privacy? When has she contributed anything positive to my life instead of just taking whatever she wanted?" "You're being completely selfish," Dad declared, deploying his most powerful manipulation tactic, the accusation that had kept me compliant for most of my adult life. "So am I said, rising from the table as tears streamed down my face despite my efforts to maintain composure. "But that's never seemed to matter to any of you." I drove home that night, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. Through the blur of tears and Portland traffic, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. Nothing would ever change unless I changed it. I would always be the responsible daughter expected to sacrifice for Madison's poor choices. I would always be the child whose needs came second to her sister's wants. I would continue giving pieces of myself away until nothing remained, unless I disrupted this pattern completely. That night in my apartment, surrounded by evidence of Madison's disregard for my space and privacy, I finally allowed myself to fall apart completely. The sobs that tore through me came from somewhere deep and primal. Years of suppressed hurt and anger finally finding release. I curled into a ball on my violated couch, clutching a throw pillow to my chest as though it could protect me from the emotional pain radiating through my entire body. When the storm of tears finally subsided, I felt hollow, but strangely clear-headed. This space, which I had created as my sanctuary from family dysfunction, no longer felt safe or truly mine. The knowledge that Madison had been here, rifling through my belongings, reading my private thoughts, inviting strangers to use my home, it had contaminated everything I'd worked to build. At 2 a.m., I called Emma, my closest friend since college. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice thick with sleep, but immediately alert when she heard my distress. "Sarah? What's wrong? Are you okay?" The entire story poured out, a jumbled, tear-stained account of the apartment invasion, the family dinner ambush, the lifetime of being overlooked and undervalued, while Madison received endless support and attention. Emma listened without interruption, occasionally making sounds of support or outrage at particularly egregious details. When I finally exhausted myself of words, silence stretched between us for several long moments. Then Emma said something that changed my entire perspective. "You know you don't have to keep playing the role they've assigned you, right? You're allowed to rewrite this script entirely." "What do you mean?" I asked, wiping tears from my cheeks with the back of my hand. "I mean you've spent your entire adult life trying to earn love and respect from people who seem constitutionally incapable of giving it to you. Your parents have shown you exactly who they are and how they value you. Believe them, and make decisions accordingly." The truth of her words hit me like a physical force. "So what do I do now?" "If it were me," Emma said carefully, "I'd consider what my life might look like if I prioritized my own well-being over their expectations. Maybe that means moving somewhere they don't know about. Maybe it means establishing strict boundaries about when and how you interact. Maybe it means therapy to process growing up as the less favored child." "All of the above," I whispered, a plan already forming in my mind. The next morning I called in sick to work. The first mental health day I'd taken in over 2 years. Instead of going to the office, I spent the entire day researching apartments in neighborhoods across Portland that my family had never visited. By late afternoon, I had scheduled viewings for 6 different places, ranging from a studio in the Alberta Arts District to a one-bedroom in the Selwood neighborhood. Over the next 2 days, I saw all 6 apartments and immediately fell in love with the last one. A second-floor unit in a converted 1920s house in the Kenton neighborhood. It featured original hardwood floors, a clawfoot bathtub, a cozy kitchen with vintage tile work, and windows that overlooked a community garden where neighbors grew vegetables and flowers together. The apartment was smaller than my current place and needed some cosmetic updates, but it had incredible character, and most importantly, existed completely outside my family's knowledge or influence. I signed the lease that same day, using money from my emergency savings to cover the security deposit and first month's rent. The landlord, a retired teacher named Patricia who lived downstairs, seemed delighted to have a quiet professional as a tenant. "When would you like to move in?" she asked as we completed the paperwork. "As soon as possible," I replied. "Would next weekend work?" With the new apartment secured, my exit strategy took shape rapidly. I opened a new checking account at a different credit union, transferring half my savings immediately. I arranged for mail forwarding to a private mailbox service rather than directly to the new address. I began slowly moving my most precious belongings, photos, important documents, my grandmother's jewelry, to the new place in small batches. I decided to abandon most of the furniture in my Pearl District apartment. The couch where Madison had entertained strangers, the dining table where she'd left stains, the bed where she'd read my private thoughts, all of it felt contaminated by her violations. I would start fresh with pieces that carried no negative associations. Setting up the new apartment became a form of therapy. Every item I brought was carefully considered. Did it spark joy? Did it serve a clear purpose? Was it free from painful memories? The resulting space was minimalist, but deeply meaningful. I invested in new bedding, soft sheets in calming blues and grays that reminded me of the Oregon coast. I hung plants in every window and displayed photographs of friends and solo adventures on the walls. I found a beautiful vintage desk at an estate sale that fit perfectly beneath the front window, creating a workspace that felt both productive and inspiring. As the new space took shape, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. For the first time in my adult life, I had created a home that was completely unknown to my family. A true sanctuary in every sense. The logistics of my disappearance required meticulous planning. I changed passwords on all online accounts and updated my contact information at work, explaining vaguely to my supervisor that I was dealing with family issues and needed to modify my personal details. I arranged for packages to be delivered to Amazon lockers rather than either address. I shared my new location with only 4 people: Emma, Jessica, my therapist, Dr. Martinez, whom I'd started seeing weekly, and Patricia, my new landlord. During the 6-week transition period, I maintained minimal contact with my family. I responded to texts with brief, uninformative replies. I deflected questions about getting together by citing work deadlines and social commitments. I kept phone conversations short and revealed nothing of substance about my daily life or emotional state. When Mom called, I provided polite but minimal responses. Work is busy. Yes, I'm eating well. No, I can't make it to dinner this Sunday. I have plans. To anyone paying close attention, my withdrawal would have been obvious, but my family had never paid close attention to me, unless they needed something. The new apartment quickly transformed from a hiding place into the foundation for genuine personal renewal. Without the constant anxiety of unexpected visits or boundary violations, I found myself relaxing in ways I hadn't experienced since childhood. I slept more soundly, waking naturally instead of to alarm clocks. I experimented with cooking elaborate meals just for the pleasure of it, trying recipes from cuisines I'd never explored. I invited friends over without worrying about what they might inadvertently report back to my family. Emma visited frequently, bringing housewarming gifts and Thai takeout for impromptu dinner parties. "You seem different," she observed one evening as we shared pad thai while sitting on floor cushions around my newly purchased coffee table. "More relaxed somehow." "I feel different," I admitted. "Like I can finally breathe properly for the first time in years." In therapy, I worked through the complex emotions surrounding my family relationships. The grief of never being the priority child, the anger at decades of unequal treatment, the guilt that still occasionally surfaced when I thought about my secret life. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that boundaries weren't just healthy, but absolutely necessary, and that my parents' inability to respect them was their failure, not mine. Families develop unspoken rules and assign specific roles to each member, she explained during one particularly insightful session. You were assigned the role of the self-sufficient child, the one who never needs help or attention. That assignment served the family system's needs, but it didn't serve yours. By changing your behavior, you're disrupting their established patterns. Expect significant resistance. The resistance came exactly as Dr. Martinez predicted. As weeks passed, my parents' messages became increasingly urgent and manipulative. Mom's texts evolved from casual check-ins, "Hope you're having a good day, sweetie," to worried inquiries about my health and well-being. "You seem distant lately. Are you feeling okay?" Dad, who rarely communicated directly outside of family gatherings, began calling during his evening commute from work. Madison predictably oscillated between angry accusations, "You're being a selfish bitch," and tearful apologies, "I'm sorry if I upset you. I love you so much," depending on what she thought might provoke a response. I monitored all these communications from the peaceful distance of my new home, responding just enough to prevent an actual welfare check, but never revealing anything substantial about my situation. The speed with which their concern about my well-being transformed into irritation when I failed to behave according to their expectations was both predictable and revealing. By the 6-week mark, I had settled completely into my new life. My name was on the mailbox. I knew which coffee shop made the best lattes within walking distance, and I had become a regular at the Saturday Farmers Market in North Portland. I had met 3 neighbors who seemed like potential friends. David, a freelance graphic designer who worked from his apartment. Lisa, the middle school teacher who lived upstairs and had an infectious laugh. And Tom, an elderly widower who maintained the most beautiful garden I'd ever seen and was always happy to share vegetables and gardening advice. The apartment felt completely mine in a way no space ever had. I knew a confrontation with my family was inevitable and would likely be painful. What I didn't anticipate was exactly when or how it would unfold. As it turned out, Mom made that decision for me with a text that read, "Emergency family dinner tomorrow night, 6 p.m. sharp. No excuses." In the weeks leading up to that fateful Sunday dinner, my parents' attempts to contact me had grown increasingly frantic and manipulative. My phone buzzed constantly with Mom's name, sometimes 5 or 6 times within an hour. Her voicemails progressed from concerned, "Sarah, honey, we just want to make sure you're okay," to desperate, "Sarah, please call us back. We're worried sick about you," to demanding, "Sarah Elizabeth Thompson, I am your mother, and I expect you to respond immediately." Dad's approach was characteristically more direct and authoritative. "Your mother is beside herself with worry. Call home immediately." Then, "This silence is completely unacceptable behavior from an adult daughter." And finally, family doesn't just disappear without explanation. Madison's messages were the most erratic, swinging wildly between vicious attacks, "You've always been a jealous, selfish bitch, and now everyone can see it," and desperate pleading, "Please talk to me. I have nowhere else to go, and I'm scared," to attempted manipulation, "Just tell me your address. I promise I won't tell Mom and Dad." According to Mom's increasingly detailed voicemails, Madison's financial situation had deteriorated further after losing yet another job, this time at an organic juice bar where apparently the manager didn't appreciate Madison's suggestions for improving their customer service approach. The subtext was clear. Madison needed help, which automatically meant I was expected to provide it. I had become expert at deflecting specific questions about my whereabouts and activities. When Mom asked if I'd be attending Sunday dinner, I replied that I had work commitments. When Dad texted asking if I could help him move furniture from the garage, I claimed I was battling a persistent cold. When Madison asked if she could crash on my couch for just one night, I said my building was being fumigated. These excuses worked because my family had always accepted my independence as a fixed personality trait rather than something I developed out of necessity. They assumed I was simply being difficult or going through some temporary phase of distance. It never occurred to them that I might have taken concrete steps to protect myself from their boundary violations. The emergency family dinner text arrived on a Thursday morning while I was enjoying coffee and a croissant at my favorite neighborhood cafe. My immediate instinct was to ignore it completely, but Dr. Martinez had been helping me understand the difference between healthy avoidance and necessary boundary setting. Avoiding my family indefinitely wasn't sustainable. Establishing clear, non-negotiable boundaries with them was. This dinner might provide the perfect opportunity to do exactly that. "I'll be there," I texted back. 3 simple words that immediately triggered a flurry of happy face emojis and heart symbols in response. As I drove to Beaverton that Sunday evening, my stomach clenched with familiar anxiety. I had prepared as thoroughly as possible, rehearsing responses to likely scenarios with both Emma and Dr. Martinez. I had meditated that morning, gone for a long run through the neighborhood, and chosen an outfit that made me feel confident, a navy blazer over a crisp white shirt and dark jeans. Still, as I parked in my parents' driveway, the familiar weight of family expectations settled heavily on my shoulders like an old, unwelcome coat. The house looked exactly as it always had. Mom's precisely maintained flower beds, Dad's obsessively manicured lawn, the porch light creating a warm welcome, while interior lights glowed golden through half-closed curtains. The perfect suburban tableau that had always felt more like a stage set than a genuine home. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and rang the doorbell instead of using my key, a small act of separation that didn't go unnoticed. "Since when do you ring the doorbell?" Mom asked when she opened the door, her attempt at lightness undermined by obvious tension around her eyes. "This is still your home, you know? Is it?" I replied quietly, stepping past her into the familiar foyer. The atmosphere inside was thick with unspoken tension and barely contained anxiety. Dad sat rigidly in his usual recliner, newspaper folded precisely beside him, pretending to watch a Mariners game with the volume turned unusually low. Madison perched on the edge of the sofa, scrolling through her phone with fake casualness while stealing glances at me every few seconds. "Dinner will be ready in 15 minutes, Mom announced, hurrying back toward the kitchen. "I made your favorite, pot roast with those little red potatoes you love." Madison loved those potatoes, not me. I'd been vegetarian for 2 years, a dietary choice my mother consistently forgot or ignored. Rather than correcting her, I simply nodded and took a seat as far from Madison as the furniture arrangement allowed. Dinner itself was a masterclass in passive-aggressive family communication. Mom filled every silence with nervous chatter about neighbors, distant relatives, and coworkers. Dad punctuated her stories with occasional grunts of acknowledgement while cutting his meat with unnecessary precision. Madison pushed food around her plate, contributing nothing but radiating barely contained anxiety. I answered direct questions with minimal responses, waiting for the real purpose of this gathering to emerge. It arrived, as family bombshells often do, with dessert. Mom had made apple pie, Madison's favorite, not mine. And as she served it with elaborate ceremony, Dad cleared his throat in that authoritative way that signaled an important family discussion. "Your sister has faced some temporary setbacks recently," he began, as though continuing a conversation we'd been having all evening. "The current job market is extremely challenging, especially for young people trying to establish careers." Mom nodded vigorously. "So challenging, and apartment rental prices have become absolutely outrageous throughout the Portland metro area." I said nothing, taking a small bite of pie while maintaining neutral eye contact. "The thing is," Dad continued, reaching deliberately into his jacket pocket, "we believe we've found an excellent solution, temporary of course, just until Madison gets back on her feet financially." With theatrical ceremony, he placed a set of keys on the table between us. My keys. To my Pearl District apartment. "We think it makes perfect sense for Madison to stay at your place for a while," Mom said, her voice bright with false confidence. "You have all that extra space, and you're at work most of the day anyway. It's really the ideal arrangement." "We already spoke with your building management," Dad added with obvious satisfaction. "Mr. Chen, very accommodating gentleman. He assured us that adding Madison to your lease temporarily wouldn't be a problem at all." I stared at the keys, feeling a strange calm settle over me like snow. "You contacted my building manager without discussing this with me first." "We knew you'd agree once you had time to think it through logically," Mom said. "Family helps family. That's always been our way." Madison finally looked up, a small triumphant smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I promise, I'll keep everything super organized this time," she said, the implication that she'd be moving in regardless of my opinion hanging heavy in the air. Dad nodded with finality. "It's all arranged then? Madison can start moving her things this weekend." just for a few months, until she finds something more permanent. They were all looking at me expectantly, waiting for my compliance with the script they'd followed my entire life. The responsible daughter would sacrifice once again for the family. The capable daughter would solve Madison's problems once again. The dependable daughter would put everyone else's needs above her own once again. I looked at each of them. Dad's confident expression, Mom's pleading eyes, Madison's barely concealed smugness, and made my decision. I felt strangely calm as I looked at my family gathered around the table, all waiting for my predictable surrender. For once, I held information they didn't have, power they couldn't anticipate. The irony that they had inadvertently created this situation through their own boundary violations wasn't lost on me. "That's interesting," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I haven't lived in that apartment for 6 weeks." The silence that followed was absolute. Mom's fork clattered against her plate. Dad's confident expression froze, then crumbled into confusion. Madison's triumphant smile vanished, replaced by widening eyes and an open mouth. "What do you mean you haven't lived there?" Mom finally asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Where exactly have you been staying?" Dad leaned forward, his face flushing with the first stirrings of anger, his default emotion when control slipped from his grasp. "I still own the apartment," I clarified calmly. "I still pay the mortgage, but I don't live there anymore. I moved out 6 weeks ago after Madison let herself in while I was on a business trip, invited strangers over, went through my personal belongings, and read my private journal." Madison's face went pale, then flushed bright red. "I didn't. It wasn't like that at all." "It was exactly like that," I countered, maintaining my composure. "You violated my privacy and my space. You've always done it because you've never been taught that other people's boundaries matter." "Boundaries again," Mom said, throwing up her hands in exasperation. "We're family, Sarah. Families don't need boundaries between them." "Healthy families absolutely have boundaries," I replied firmly. "And healthy families respect each other. They don't play favorites. They don't expect one child to constantly sacrifice for another. And they don't make major decisions about someone's living space without consulting them." Dad's expression had shifted from confusion to full-blown anger. "So you've been lying to us for weeks, hiding where you live. What kind of daughter does that?" "The kind who has learned it's the only way to protect herself," I said quietly. "The kind who has spent her entire life trying to earn the same love and consideration automatically given to her sister. The kind who finally realized that was never going to happen." "This is ridiculous," Mom said, tears gathering in her eyes. "We've always treated you girls exactly the same." I couldn't suppress the short, bitter laugh that escaped. "Mom, that's simply not true, and I think on some level you know it. When Madison needed college tuition, you paid it. When I needed it, I worked 2 jobs. When Madison lost apartments because she spent rent money on other things, you bailed her out. When I saved for years to buy my own place, you barely acknowledged the achievement until you decided it could solve Madison's problems." "That's completely different," Dad interjected. "Madison needs more support. She's more sensitive, more artistic. You've always been so capable and independent." "So capable that you decided I didn't need parents," I finished for him. "Just occasional observers who stepped in only when they needed something from me." Madison had been unusually quiet, but now she spoke up, her voice taking on that wounded tone that had always been so effective. "Where am I supposed to go now? I literally have nowhere to live." "That's not my problem," I said, surprised by how easily the words came. "It's never been my problem, but somehow it always became my problem. Not anymore." "You can't just abandon your sister," Mom gasped, genuine panic creeping into her voice. "Where are you living?" Dad demanded. "We need to know where you are." "No, you don't," I said firmly. "That's the boundary I'm setting. I have a new place where I feel safe and secure. Madison doesn't get to know where it is. You don't get to know where it is. Not until I can trust that information won't be used against me." "Against you?" Dad scoffed. "We're your parents, not your enemies." "Then start acting like it," I replied, rising from my chair. "Start respecting my choices. Start treating me with the same consideration you give Madison. Start acknowledging that I'm an adult with the right to decide who enters my home and when." "You can't just leave," Mom said, panic fully taking over her voice. "We need to work this out as a family." "I've been trying to work this out my entire life," I said, gathering my purse. "You've never been interested in listening. When you're ready to have a real conversation, one where my feelings and needs matter as much as Madison's, you know how to reach me." "But if there's an emergency," Dad's voice had lost some of its certainty. "If we need to see you." "You can call or text if it's a genuine emergency and not another attempt to manipulate me into solving Madison's problems," I said. "I'll respond, but I'm done being the family's designated problem solver. This dinner might provide the perfect opportunity to do exactly that." "I'll be there," I texted back. 3 simple words that immediately triggered a flurry of happy face emojis and heart symbols in response. As I drove to Beaverton that Sunday evening, my stomach clenched with familiar anxiety. I had prepared as thoroughly as possible, rehearsing responses to likely scenarios with both Emma and Dr. Martinez. I had meditated that morning, gone for a long run through the neighborhood, and chosen an outfit that made me feel confident. A navy blazer over a crisp white shirt and dark jeans. Still, as I parked in my parents' driveway, the familiar weight of family expectations settled heavily on my shoulders, like an old unwelcome coat. The house looked exactly as it always had. Mom's precisely maintained flower beds, Dad's obsessively manicured lawn, the porch light creating a warm welcome while interior lights glowed golden through half-closed curtains. The perfect suburban tableau that had always felt more like a stage set than a genuine home. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and rang the doorbell instead of using my key, a small act of separation that didn't go unnoticed. "Since when do you ring the doorbell?" Mom asked when she opened the door, her attempt at lightness undermined by obvious tension around her eyes. "This is still your home, you know." "Is it?" I replied quietly, stepping past her into the familiar foyer. The atmosphere inside was thick with unspoken tension and barely contained anxiety. Dad sat rigidly in his usual recliner, newspaper folded precisely beside him, pretending to watch a Mariners game with the volume turned unusually low. Madison perched on the edge of the sofa, scrolling through her phone with fake casualness while stealing glances at me every few seconds. "Dinner will be ready in 15 minutes, Mom announced, hurrying back toward the kitchen. "I made your favorite, pot roast with those little red potatoes you love." Madison loved those potatoes, not me. I'd been vegetarian for 2 years, a dietary choice my mother consistently forgot or ignored. Rather than correcting her, I simply nodded and took a seat as far from Madison as the furniture arrangement allowed. Dinner itself was a masterclass in passive-aggressive family communication. Mom filled every silence with nervous chatter about neighbors, distant relatives, and coworkers. Dad punctuated her stories with occasional grunts of acknowledgement while cutting his meat with unnecessary precision. Madison pushed food around her plate, contributing nothing but radiating barely contained anxiety. I answered direct questions with minimal responses, waiting for the real purpose of this gathering to emerge. It arrived, as family bombshells often do, with dessert. Mom had made apple pie, Madison's favorite, not mine, and as she served it with elaborate ceremony, Dad cleared his throat in that authoritative way that signaled an important family discussion. "Your sister has faced some temporary setbacks recently," he began, as though continuing a conversation we'd been having all evening. "The current job market is extremely challenging, especially for young people trying to establish careers." Mom nodded vigorously. "So challenging, and apartment rental prices have become absolutely outrageous throughout the Portland metro area." I said nothing, taking a small bite of pie while maintaining neutral eye contact. "The thing is," Dad continued, reaching deliberately into his jacket pocket, "we believe we've found an excellent solution. Temporary, of course, just until Madison gets back on her feet financially." With theatrical ceremony, he placed a set of keys on the table between us. My keys. To my Pearl District apartment. "We think it makes perfect sense for Madison to stay at your place for a while," Mom said, her voice bright with false confidence. "You have all that extra space, and you're at work most of the day anyway. It's really the ideal arrangement." "We already spoke with your building management," Dad added with obvious satisfaction. "Mr. Chen, very accommodating gentleman. He assured us that adding Madison to your lease temporarily wouldn't be a problem at all." I stared at the keys, feeling a strange calm settle over me like snow. "You contacted my building manager without discussing this with me first." "We knew you'd agree once you had time to think it through logically," Mom said. "Family helps family. That's always been our way." Madison finally looked up, a small, triumphant smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I promise I'll keep everything super organized this time," she said, the implication that she'd be moving in regardless of my opinion hanging heavy in the air. Dad nodded with finality. "It's all arranged then. Madison can start moving her things this weekend, just for a few months until she finds something more permanent." They were all looking at me expectantly, waiting for my compliance with the script they'd followed my entire life. The responsible daughter would sacrifice once again for the family. The capable daughter would solve Madison's problems once again. The dependable daughter would put everyone else's needs above her own once again. I looked at each of them. Dad's confident expression, Mom's pleading eyes, Madison's barely concealed smugness, and made my decision. I felt strangely calm as I looked at my family gathered around the table, all waiting for my predictable surrender. For once, I held information they didn't have, power they couldn't anticipate. The irony that they had inadvertently created the situation through their own boundary violations wasn't lost on me. "That's interesting," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I haven't lived in that apartment for 6 weeks." The silence that followed was absolute. Mom's fork clattered against her plate. Dad's confident expression froze, then crumbled into confusion. Madison's triumphant smile vanished, replaced by widening eyes and an open mouth. What do you mean you haven't lived there? Mom finally asked, her voice trembling slightly. Where exactly have you been staying? Dad leaned forward, his face flushing with the first stirrings of anger, his default emotion when control slipped from his grasp. I still own the apartment, I clarified calmly. I still pay the mortgage, but I don't live there anymore. I moved out 6 weeks ago after Madison let herself in while I was on a business trip, invited strangers over, went through my personal belongings, and read my private journal. Madison's face went pale, then flushed bright red. It wasn't like that at all. It was exactly like that. I countered, maintaining my composure. You violated my privacy and my space. You've always done it because you've never been taught that other people's boundaries matter. Boundaries again, Mom said, throwing up her hands in exasperation. We're family, Sarah. Families don't need boundaries between them. Healthy families absolutely have boundaries, I replied firmly. And healthy families respect each other. They don't play favorites. They don't expect one child to constantly sacrifice for another, and they don't make major decisions about someone's living space without consulting them. Dad's expression had shifted from confusion to full-blown anger. So you've been lying to us for weeks, hiding where you live. What kind of daughter does that? The kind who has learned it's the only way to protect herself, I said quietly. The kind who has spent her entire life trying to earn the same love and consideration automatically given to her sister. The kind who finally realized that was never going to happen. This is ridiculous, Mom said, tears gathering in her eyes. We've always treated you girls exactly the same. I couldn't suppress the short, bitter laugh that escaped. Mom, that's simply not true, and I think on some level you know it. When Madison needed college tuition, you paid it. When I needed it, I worked 2 jobs. When Madison lost apartments because she spent rent money on other things, you bailed her out. When I saved for years to buy my own place, you barely acknowledged the achievement until you decided it could solve Madison's problems. That's completely different, Dad interjected. Madison needs more support. She's more sensitive, more artistic. You've always been so capable and independent. So capable that you decided I didn't need parents, I finished for him. Just occasional observers who stepped in only when they needed something from me. Madison had been unusually quiet, but now she spoke up, her voice taking on that wounded tone that had always been so effective. Where am I supposed to go now? I literally have nowhere to live. That's not my problem, I said, surprised by how easily the words came. It's never been my problem, but somehow it always became my problem. Not anymore. You can't just abandon your sister, Mom gasped, genuine panic creeping into her voice. Where are you living? Dad demanded. We need to know where you are. No, you don't, I said firmly. That's the boundary I'm setting. I have a new place where I feel safe and secure. Madison doesn't get to know where it is. You don't get to know where it is. Not until I can trust that information won't be used against me. Against you? Dad scoffed. We're your parents, not your enemies. Then start acting like it, I replied, rising from my chair. Start respecting my choices. Start treating me with the same consideration you give Madison. Start acknowledging that I'm an adult with the right to decide who enters my home and when. You can't just leave, Mom said, panic fully taking over her voice. We need to work this out as a family. I've been trying to work this out my entire life, I said, gathering my purse. You've never been interested in listening. When you're ready to have a real conversation, one where my feelings and needs matter as much as Madison's, you know how to reach me. But if there's an emergency, Dad's voice had lost some of its certainty. If we need to see you. You can call or text if it's a genuine emergency and not another attempt to manipulate me into solving Madison's problems, I said. I'll respond, but I'm done being the family's designated problem solver. Madison was crying now, real tears streaming down her face. You're being so cruel. I just needed help. For the first time, I looked directly at my sister, seeing not the perpetual victim she portrayed herself as, but the adult who had consistently chosen to take rather than ask, to assume rather than earn. You've always needed help, Madison, and I've always provided it, even when it hurt me. That ends today. It's time for you to figure out your own solutions. As I walked toward the door, Mom followed, her hands fluttering anxiously. You can't just walk away from family, Sarah. Family is forever. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. I'm not walking away from family, Mom. I'm walking away from the role you assigned me in this family. I'm still your daughter. I still love you. But I won't be Madison's safety net anymore, and I won't be the dependable one you only notice when you need something. The drive back to Kenton was surreal. My hands should have been shaking. My heart should have been racing. Instead, I felt a profound sense of peace washing over me like warm water. For the first time in my adult life, I had spoken my truth without apology or qualification. I had established boundaries and maintained them despite emotional manipulation that had always worked before. As I climbed the stairs to my second-floor apartment, I realized I was smiling. The space that greeted me felt more like home than anywhere I'd ever lived. Not because of the furnishings or the neighborhood, but because it represented choices I'd made entirely for myself. A choice to value my own well-being. A choice to rewrite the script of my family relationships. A choice to finally, truly put myself first. The days following the confrontation brought a hurricane of emotions I hadn't fully prepared for. Relief came first. A profound sense of liberation that left me feeling physically lighter. Then came waves of doubt. Had I been too harsh? Should I have found a gentler way to establish boundaries? Was I destroying relationships beyond repair? Guilt followed, deeply ingrained from decades of being told that family obligations superseded personal needs. And underneath it all, a current of grief for the supportive family I'd always wanted, but never truly had. The initial loneliness was more challenging than I'd anticipated. Sunday evenings, when I would normally have been enduring family dinner, felt particularly empty. I filled them with new rituals, calling Emma for long conversations, taking sunset walks along the Columbia River, cooking elaborate meals while listening to podcasts, attending community events at the neighborhood center. Slowly, the emptiness began to feel less like deprivation and more like possibility. A blank canvas waiting for new experiences and connections. My phone became a battlefield of emotional manipulation that was both predictable and exhausting. Dad's messages were curt and accusatory. Your mother cried herself to sleep last night. Madison is staying in a friend's closet. This isn't how we raised you. Mom alternated between guilt trips. I keep wondering where I went wrong as a mother, and desperate attempts at normalcy. Saw a sweater at Nordstrom that would look beautiful with your complexion. Madison's approach was the most chaotic, ranging from vicious personal attacks, everyone was right about you being a cold, selfish bitch, to pathetic pleading. Please just tell me your address, I swear I won't cause any problems. To attempted emotional blackmail, I'm having panic attacks because I don't know where I'll sleep next week. I responded to none of them initially, using techniques Dr. Martinez had taught me to acknowledge the emotions their messages triggered without feeling compelled to fix or respond to them. Instead, I focused on building my new life with intentional purpose. I joined a book club that met monthly at the independent bookstore on Alberta Street. I volunteered Saturday mornings at a local animal shelter, discovering that I had a natural way with anxious rescue dogs. I accepted invitations from coworkers I'd previously kept at professional distances, building friendships based on mutual interests rather than family obligation. Each new connection reminded me that family could be chosen as well as inherited, that relationships could be based on respect and reciprocity rather than guilt and manipulation. 3 weeks after the confrontation, I finally responded to one of Mom's messages, a simple inquiry about Dad's upcoming retirement plans. This opened a careful, limited channel of communication. I answered texts about neutral topics, but ignored emotional manipulation. I deflected questions about my location. I responded to updates about extended family members, but not to news about Madison's latest crisis. It was exhausting at first, this constant vigilance about what to engage with and what to ignore, but gradually it became second nature. 5 weeks later, I agreed to meet my parents for coffee at a neutral cafe in Southeast Portland, equidistant between their house and my general area. The choice of location was deliberate. Dr. Martinez had suggested neutral territory to avoid the emotional triggers associated with the family home. I arrived early, choosing a table near the window with a clear view of the parking lot. When my parents walked in, they looked older somehow. Dad's posture slightly more stooped, Mom's smile more strained than usual. They spotted me immediately, Mom raising her hand in an uncertain wave, Dad nodding with uncomfortable formality. They were both dressed more formally than I'd expected. Dad in a button-down shirt instead of his usual weekend polo, Mom in her church clothes rather than casual wear. They were treating this like an official negotiation, which was both amusing and sad. "You look well," Mom said after we'd exchanged awkward greetings. Her eyes searched my face as though checking for signs of distress or hardship. "I am well," I confirmed, sipping my latte. "Work is going great. Life is good." Dad cleared his throat, always his prelude to what he considered serious conversation. "Madison asks about you constantly." Of course that would be his opening move. I nodded, but offered nothing in response. The conversation that followed was stilted and uncomfortable, full of long pauses and careful navigation around sensitive subjects. Mom talked about her garden club, a new recipe she'd tried, updates about neighbors I barely remembered. Dad mentioned problems with the house's gutters, the Blazers' disappointing season, a documentary about World War II he'd found fascinating. I shared carefully selected details about a successful work project, a movie I'd enjoyed, a new coffee shop I'd discovered. We were like actors performing the roles of a loving family without any of the actual intimacy that should have accompanied it. It was Mom who finally broke through the surface-level exchange. "We miss you," she said suddenly, her voice catching. "The house feels empty without you coming for Sunday dinners." "I haven't lived at home for 8 years, Mom," I pointed out gently. "I know, but you were still part of our routine, part of our lives. Tears welled in her eyes. I don't understand why that had to change. Dad, visibly uncomfortable with emotional displays, shifted in his chair. What your mother is trying to say is that we may have taken your reliability for granted. Your consistency. It was perhaps the closest thing to an admission of wrongdoing I'd ever heard from him. I waited, allowing the moment space to breathe before responding. I never meant to make you feel less important than Madison. Mom continued, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. You were always so capable, so independent. She needed more guidance, more support. That's exactly the problem, Mom, I said quietly. You confused capability with not having needs. Everyone has needs. I just learned early that mine wouldn't be met consistently, so I stopped expressing them. Dad frowned. That's not entirely fair, Sarah. We provided for you. We supported your education. You contributed $800 per semester toward my education, I corrected gently. I worked 2 jobs to cover the rest. You paid for Madison's entire degree, plus her living expenses, plus spending money. Can you see how different those experiences were? He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again, something like recognition dawning in his expression. We never meant to hurt you, Mom whispered. I believe that, I said. But you did hurt me, and you continued hurting me even when I tried to establish basic boundaries. The apartment situation, giving Madison keys to my home without even consulting me, that showed me exactly how little you respected me as an independent adult. Dad looked down at his untouched coffee. We should have asked you first. The simple acknowledgement, so long in coming, loosened something tight in my chest. Yes, you should have. Can you forgive us? Mom asked, reaching across the table for my hand. I let her take it, but my response was measured. Forgiveness is a process, not a single moment. I'm working on it, but rebuilding trust will take time and consistent change from everyone. And Madison? Dad asked carefully. She's still your sister. But Madison and I will need to figure out our own path forward, I said firmly. That's between her and me, and it will happen on my timeline, not yours. She's staying with her friend Jasmine temporarily, Mom offered, but it's not ideal. Very cramped quarters. I recognized the subtle attempt to reactivate my sense of responsibility and shook my head. Mom, I'm not responsible for Madison's housing situation. That's exactly the pattern we need to break. They both looked uncomfortable, but didn't push further. As we prepared to leave, Mom asked the inevitable question, when will we see you again? Will you come to Sunday dinner next week? Not yet, I said honestly. I need more time. But maybe we could meet for coffee again in a few weeks. It was a small step, but their cautious smiles suggested it was enough for now. Madison was notably absent from that first reconciliation attempt, and from the careful text exchanges that followed over the next month. Then, 7 weeks after our confrontation, I received a message from her that stood out dramatically from her previous communications. I started seeing a therapist. She says I should apologize to you when I'm ready to really mean it, not just because I want something. I'm not ready yet, but I wanted you to know I'm working on it. It was the first time my sister had ever acknowledged, even indirectly, that her behavior might require genuine amends, rather than just surface-level apologies. I sent back a simple response. I'm proud of you for taking that step. In my own therapy sessions, Dr. Martinez helped me process the complex emotions involved in rebuilding family relationships on entirely new terms. What you're attempting is incredibly difficult, she acknowledged. You're not just changing your own behavior patterns. You're asking an entire family system to transform dynamics that have been in place for decades. There will be resistance, setbacks, and moments of doubt. She was right about the resistance, particularly when Mom began making subtle inquiries about my new address, or when Dad hinted that family gatherings would be so much simpler if Madison and I could just put the past behind us and move forward. Each time, I gently but firmly redirected the conversation, reinforcing the boundaries I'd established, while remaining open to genuine progress. My life in Kenton continued to flourish in ways I hadn't anticipated. I developed close friendships with David, the graphic designer who shared my love of hiking, and Lisa, the teacher who introduced me to her book club and community garden group. Through the animal shelter, I met Marcus, not the same Marcus from my past, a veterinarian who shared my passion for rescue animals and weekend adventures exploring Oregon's natural beauty. Most importantly, I developed a healthier relationship with myself. Without the constant emotional drain of family expectations and boundary violations, I discovered interests and aspects of my personality that had been suppressed for years. I took a ceramics class and found I had natural artistic ability. I joined a hiking group that explored state parks throughout the Pacific Northwest. I began writing again, something I'd loved in college but abandoned under the pressure of adult responsibilities. 9 months after the confrontation, I invited my parents to meet me at a restaurant in my neighborhood. It was a calculated risk, bringing them into my area, but one that felt right given the progress we'd made. After dinner, I walked them to my building, not inviting them up, but allowing them this knowledge of my general location. It looks like a nice neighborhood, Dad said, studying the tree-lined street with approval. It is, I agreed. I'm genuinely happy here. Mom squeezed my hand. That's what matters most, sweetheart, that you're happy and healthy. I smiled, recognizing the authenticity behind her words. Our relationship remained far from perfect, still carrying shadows of old patterns and unequal dynamics. But it was evolving, slowly reshaping itself into something that might, with continued effort on all sides, eventually become genuinely healthy. My reconciliation with Madison came even more gradually. 6 months of consistent therapy helped her recognize destructive patterns in her own behavior. And she reached out with a genuine apology that acknowledged specific actions rather than making vague excuses or deflecting blame. We began rebuilding our relationship with carefully structured interactions. Coffee dates with clear time boundaries, activities that didn't involve my home or personal belongings. Slowly, cautiously, we started developing a connection based on mutual respect rather than the dysfunctional patterns established in childhood. The process of establishing boundaries and rebuilding family relationships on healthier terms continues to this day. There are still challenging conversations, still moments when old patterns threaten to resurface. But I no longer feel responsible for managing everyone else's emotions and crises at the expense of my own well-being. I no longer sacrifice my mental health to maintain an illusion of family harmony that was never really there. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do for our families is to love ourselves enough to demand better treatment. Sometimes the bravest action we can take is recognizing when relationships are damaging us and taking concrete steps to protect ourselves, even when those steps feel radical or go against everything we've been taught about family loyalty. It's not selfish to require respect. It's not wrong to establish and enforce boundaries. And sometimes the only way to truly save your family relationships is to be willing to lose them as they currently exist in order to rebuild them on healthier foundations. The apartment in Kenton remains my sanctuary. Not because it's hidden from my family anymore, but because it represents my commitment to prioritizing my own well-being. It's filled with furniture I chose, books I love, plants that thrive under my care, and photographs of adventures I've taken with people who value and respect me. Most importantly, it's a space where I can be completely myself without fear of judgment, manipulation, or violation. It's home in the truest sense, not because of the walls or the address, but because it represents the life I built when I finally decided I was worth fighting for. If you've ever found yourself in a similar situation with family members who consistently cross boundaries and expect you to accommodate their dysfunction, please know that you deserve better. You deserve relationships based on mutual respect, not guilt and obligation. You deserve to feel safe and valued in your own home and life. Setting boundaries isn't cruel. It's necessary. Taking care of yourself isn't selfish. It's essential. And sometimes, the healthiest thing you can do is step away from toxic dynamics, even when they come wrapped in the language of family love and loyalty. Your peace of mind and emotional well-being matter. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. Update. For those asking about Madison, she's doing much better now. She kept up with therapy, found stable housing with roommates who have clear expectations about shared responsibilities, and has been working the same job for over 8 months now. A record for her. We have lunch once a month and text occasionally. It's not the sister relationship I dreamed of as a kid, but it's honest and respectful, which is more than we ever had before. My parents and I have dinner together about once a month, and while there are still moments of tension, they've largely stopped trying to make me responsible for Madison's problems. Progress isn't always linear, but it's happening. And yes, I eventually let them see my apartment. Mom brought homemade cookies, and Dad fixed a loose cabinet hinge without being asked. Small steps, but in the right direction. Thank you to everyone who shared their own boundary-setting stories in the comments. It helps to know we're not alone in this struggle. TLDR. Family gave my sister keys to my apartment without asking, so I secretly moved out and didn't tell them where I lived for months. Finally confronted them at dinner, when they announced my sister would be moving into my old place. Set boundaries, went low contact, and slowly rebuilt relationships on my terms. Sometimes you have to be willing to lose your family as you know them to save the relationships that actually matter.